I am Brother Cornell West.
This is Chris Hedges.
I'm Rosa Clemente.
Hey, what's up? This is Chuck D, Public Enemy Prophets of Rage.
And this is Newsbeat.
Yes, indeedy. I wrote graffiti on the bus. The man, Manny Faces, rocking with you one time. This week in social justice, brought to you by the Newsbeat Podcast, an exceptional mix of social justice journalism, highfalutin social justice journalism, I might say, mixed with independent music, hip hop artistry, and two funky brothers named Rashed Mian and Chris Tawarski, managing editor and the editor in chief, respectively, of the almighty Newsbeat Podcast and its sister show, This Week in Social Justice. Hello, gentlemen. Start your electronic engines.
What up? What up?
What's up, Manny?
Love the jersey.
Where the hell you at?
Thank you, sir. Still represent my New York Knickerbockers, and those who are watching on the feed can see.
Look at that. This guy.
That I paid extra. And by the time it was delivered, they were out of the playoffs. So custom jersey fun. So listen, I am actually at a secret location, unbeknownst to most people. It is a secret bunker known to a few people as the Compound, recording and broadcasting live and direct from the band called Fuse Compound, secret headquarters to our brethren in musical arms, the band called Fuse. Of course, you might know us for our podcast. You might be listening on the podcast feed, and you know our full episodes include independent rap artists contributing their brilliance to social justice issues of the day. Silent Night, our artist in residence, is one of the front folks for the band called Fuse. The band called Fuse has created original music for a couple of our episodes. Why We Riot, the award-winning episode that put us on the map, I would say, and also the year-end joint with Color of Change. No.
Is a change going to come?
Yeah. No,
America's
but there was a change going to come with Silent Night. There's another one that the band did. The end of the second season. The future journalism. Future journalism.
Oh, right. The future journalism. That's right.
So the band called Fuse, mighty fusion band out of New York, New Jersey, so New York area, but New Jersey and surrounding areas. We are here hiding out in their dugout. They don't know we're here, so I'm going to rifle through their stuff. But anyway, shouts to them. Shouts for to all the musicians getting back to music and live performances after this horrific pandemic year that has silenced so many of our wonderful artists. And here we are.
I know we keep our drinks to the side, but I think we could cheers to that at least. All right.
Salute.
Cheers.
To everyone coming back. And salute to the band called Fuse, Silent Night, who is actually hiding off on the side. I was in downtown New Brunswick, New Jersey, doing some DJ things, and I appreciated being able to rock out of the compound so that we can still bring you This Week in Social Justice. Now, let's get to it. It is important. We have a lot of things to cover this week. We have a guest coming up. Is that true? I believe we have a fantastic guest talking about a very timely and important issue.
Yeah. So we have Dr. Herns Marcelin, who's a professor of anthropology and director of global health studies at the University of Miami. And he also runs a group out of Haiti. And I'm sure many people have heard that the president of Haiti was assassinated yesterday. It's not the first assassination in Haiti's history. Right. I think there was over 7 of those within a 4-year span. I think there were over 70 dictatorships in Haiti. And he's going to be speaking about the United States involvement in Haiti.
It is an ongoing thing.
Tisk.
Indeed. All right, good. I like to get some insight as to, we hear these things happen, and we might turn to our foreign affairs programming on TV and hear a bunch of talking heads talking and doing all the talking head thing. But you know that the Newsbeat crew and our esteemed guests will bring it to you straight, no chaser. No, I mean, in the meantime, between time, let's get into it. We will start off the show with our typical way that we start off the show. It is with our Newsbeat News Bites. Let's go. So,
all right. I think I'm going to start that one.
Kick it off, my friend.
All right. So, oftentimes I start with something horrific. And so the trend continues. But Prison Policy Initiative, which we cite a lot on this show and in the podcast, and we've had sources from Prison Policy on to discuss these issues for you guys. They released a report in June I was about to say this month. I can't believe it's July. They released a report in June that said suicides are up 22% from inside prisons in 2018 as compared to 2016. There's a lag in the information, the data coming out because prisons are just notoriously slow and states are notoriously slow at getting that information out. And some localities don't even provide the information. But it just shows that the horrific toll prisons take on people. So prisons are up, like I said, prisons are up 22% in that 2-year span. Also, unbelievably, deaths by drugs and alcohol intoxication are up an astounding 139% in that same 2-year time span. Jesus. And I'm going to read from the report. Yeah, just in the 2 years. And you see that. So people who are watching the stream, you can see the graph, and it looks like a huge spike. It looks like, one of those COVID spikes that we saw last year, which is insane. And the report obviously doesn't touch on that because it's 2018. But according to a report in 2018, state prisons saw the highest number of suicides, 340, since the Bureau of Justice Statistics began collecting this data 20 years ago. So compared to the 1% net growth of state prison populations, since that time, suicides have increased by a shocking 85%. So populations have only increased by 1%, but there's a huge increase in suicides. So I think it's just something that people need to pay attention to. This is related somewhat to another episode we're working on for the podcast feed. But yeah, I think it's always important, especially with COVID, how we tried to, keep abreast of what was happening inside those institutions because they are known for poor healthcare and inadequate healthcare. Just to see these numbers, people are essentially getting sentenced for nonviolent or misdemeanor crimes and are then having a death sentence, basically.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about so many things play into this. The money bail, the cash bail system. Everyone knows the story of Khalif Browder, but this is not these big cases you hear about aren't one-offs. They're happening all over. Probably, I don't know. Probably, I don't want to say, but what effect that COVID had on this number, and also what effect does the fact that you just said it? Not all municipalities report numbers. We've talked to people about trying to gauge how COVID has affected incarcerated folks, and not everyone's reporting the numbers. Some places, you know what I mean? Like, so there's this constant problem with being able to judge and gauge what's happening in our prison populations because the prison population controls don't give the data. Like, that's an ongoing theme that I keep hearing come up.
We'll be talking a little bit more about the lack of transparency in prisons and jails a little bit later on.
All right, right on. Thank you, Rashad, for bringing that to our attention. This is a tragic story and a weirdly timely story. Minneapolis police were conducting a high-speed chase through, apparently, and I'm saying I haven't gotten all the information verified or whatever, it's in the news and such, a residential neighborhood, struck a car, chasing a car, struck another car, someone who was not involved in the chase, just a random ass car, just kind of going through life, and killed the man inside, who tragically and ironically and horribly coincidentally happens to be the uncle of Darnella Frazier, who was the young woman who filmed the death of George Floyd. The one who got that footage that obviously sparked so much in our world. It's crazy that this happened. It's not it wasn't so the police ended up killing her uncle in a way, and rest in peace. And it wasn't sort of an interaction sort of thing, but it's still horribly tragic and ironic. And Rashad, as we're talking, as his news came over, he looked up a couple things, and there is, as we like to do, there's a tie-in to overall policing and sort of maybe the irresponsibility that has permeated police departments across the country. What did you find as we heard this terrible news that actually ties into a larger problem?
Yeah, we don't have a lot of time, so I'll keep it quick. But this is something that's come up a lot in, police reform issues. The idea of these high-speed chases, that these high-speed pursuits by police. The McClatchy reported on a study that was done that showed that at least 416 people were killed in police chases in 2017, which is crazy. I mean, I don't even know how many police chases there are on a regular day, but that seems like a crazy number, 416. But
Right.
from 1979 through 2017, 13,000 people have been killed. That's an average of 336. And they also found a spike in recent years in these cases. So that average goes up to like 399 deaths per year. But again, just something to pay attention to. Maybe we can flesh it out in a later stream or episode. But these police chases often end in violence, and innocent bystanders are killed because of them. And obviously, you hear this a lot, but police departments then go ahead and blame the person they were chasing rather than taking responsibility for pursuing people like this, even though we know they have surveillance technologies that could help find these people if they really wanted to.
Yeah, and this is despite also some supposed efforts to try to, mitigate some of the dangers in police chases, which has been said to be one of the most dangerous police activities. They've been trying to make some changes or try to do some things like training. It's like they do something crazy and they're like, well, we've been training them, and like, well, if you were training them, then maybe these things wouldn't happen. All right, we'll follow that story. Just crazy set of circumstances, unfortunately. Chris, your news bite, sir.
Yeah, so this is something, staying with the topic of Indigenous schools in Canada. And on our last episode, for listeners who might want to tune back in and go back and check it out, we broke down sort of the history of this. And in a nutshell, there were over 150,000 Indigenous children who were taken from their families by the Canadian government and put in these so-called residential schools that were run by religious denominations, majority the Catholic Church. And you see these headlines recently about these unmarked graves and these mass graves of children being found, and that's what this is. These children, there are thousands of them who never made it home. There's thousands of them still missing, and there's an active search going on right now to try to locate these mass burial sites. And so I came across a story, and it's a little bit of a more positive story. It's all connected with this, that in 2015, Canada actually had this commission that released a report, and they were called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and they put forth 92 recommendations of how the country can heal. And one of them was to give back these families their ancestral names, because as soon as someone is put in one of these schools, their hair was cut and they were renamed and given a Christian name. And what I left out of last episode, which is insane also, is that they were, besides a Christian name, they were given a number. And a lot of these kids went through, years. If they survived these torture schools, they were just referred to as a number. And so Canada just recently, earlier this month, last week actually, is moving forth with one of these recommendations that it'll actually be able to give these families back their names. It's only good. The offer is only good until, from what I understand, for until 2026, which is insane as well. I mean, but they'll waive all the fees associated with giving back the family their name on government issued identification. So,
Nice.
I mean, and this woman
call out. Operators are standing by.
Right.
It's
Seriously.
Yeah. So I don't. As you said, we cover so many horrific atrocities on the show. I just figured, something a little bit toward the positive. At least they're getting their names back. I mean,
Wow, that is positive. I joke, but for them to limited time only.
Seriously.
Columbus Day sale. Gets your.
It's harmful.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Chris. I tell you, you've opened up my eyes and a lot of listeners' eyes to all the atrocities happening with the Canadian residential schools, the way they've treated the Indigenous folk, how Americans have treated not just Indigenous folk, but people of color, their legacy, their bones, their history. So we're looking at all of these things, and I know you'll stay on it. So thanks for that. All right, let's go. We are going to get into a couple of segments. Don't forget, we are speaking about Haiti tonight, and there obviously is there's world news, but you know that we always try to take our news beat angle and bring you some different insights. We have a guest coming up who will break some things down for us. In the meantime, let's talk about the issues we have on the plate today. Rashad, I think you're up first. Yeah.
Yeah. So I know viewers and listeners probably have been paying attention to what's going on in Capitol Hill, especially with this infrastructure plan, this so-called bipartisan infrastructure plan. And I'm going to sort of take us through it really quick. It involves the infrastructure plan, what it does not include now, and how that impacts, marginalized communities who are disproportionately impacted by climate change, and also these new revelations from Exxon, these amazing leaks that came out last week that shows the lies and also the way in which the fossil fuel industry controls our politicians. So I guess I'll start. Yeah, I guess I'll start back in March. So if you guys remember, that's when Biden proposed this enormous American jobs plan, as he called it. I think it was $2 trillion, and it would have created many jobs, which was especially needed after the pandemic. And it was going to make improvements to the infrastructure and address climate change in many different ways through clean energy, through investments in electric vehicles, capping some fossil fuel and coal mines. And this was all encompassing to tackle the climate crisis. And the bill would have gone a long way to dealing with pollution, which is huge. And it impacts, as I said, a marginalized community the most. And so this is from a report that was released by a research institute. And I'm going to quote from it. It said, President Biden's plan calls for $50 billion for improving infrastructure resiliency across the electric grid, food systems, health systems, urban infrastructure, and transportation infrastructure. It goes on to say that climate change disproportionately affects marginalized communities, and part of the plan focuses on building resilient infrastructure in vulnerable communities most at risk to the climate impacts. Now, they looked at what happened now that they have this so-called bipartisan plan. It says scrapping these key elements would not only make it impossible for the U.S. to meet its commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030, but it would also miss enormous opportunities for cleaner air, quality jobs, and resilient communities. So one of the biggest cuts to the so-called, I keep saying so-called, and you're going to find out why in a minute. The so-called bipartisan infrastructure plan it concerns electronic transportation. So the initial legislation was proposed to provide up to almost $200 billion in investments and tax credits. So regular people, you and I, potentially, if we had enough money, can go out and purchase an electric vehicle to reduce our price on gasoline, and also to help the environment. And that was huge because pollution disproportionately impacts the communities of color. And Manny, I think I got rid of that link, so you don't have to worry about that. But according to the American Lung Association, they said far too often clean air is out of reach for communities living near major pollution sources, including highways, power plants, and community colors are disproportionately harmed by poor air quality in the United States. And the time to act on electronic transportation is now. So, for example, America's bus fleet is largely run by diesel, right? And that's extremely harmful. And part of the plan would have went ahead and electrified these buses. Would have been huge for communities where people potentially can't afford cars themselves and rely on public transportation, especially school busing to get to schools. And that pollution is extremely harmful to these kids. The original plan also would have funded modernization and sustainable solutions for buildings and housing. This is incredible, and I couldn't believe it when I saw it. But according to the EPA, residential and commercial buildings represent about 13% of greenhouse gas emissions in 2019. So just think about a dense city and what that means for people living in there, and the emissions that are being sucked out into the sky because of it. So funding in the original infrastructure plan, funding for this part of the proposal went from over $300 billion to zero. They just stripped the entire plan. And, it would have driven down, that was huge because it would have driven down energy costs for low-income people. And low-income people, again, this is part of this theme, how climate change and rising heat impacts marginalized communities the most. Those people are more burdened by high energy bills than anybody else. So there was a stat from one report that found that the average energy burden for Black households is 43% higher than their white counterparts. So what that means basically is these people are having to devote more of their income to energy than other people in this country. And this would have had a direct impact on those people. But again, this so-called bipartisan infrastructure plan gutted that. So as you know, there's so many other aspects of climate change, and of the infrastructure bill that I hope people check out and what it would have meant. We don't have time to cover it all. But that brings us to the Exxon report. And this was revealed by Unearthed, which is the media investigative journalism arm of an environmental group out of the UK called Greenpeace. And Manny, I think we have that link if you want to pull it up, because they basically did an investigative sting where they did something that no other journalist basically has ever been able to accomplish. And they got these lobbyists that represent Exxon to admit that they only support things like carbon taxing because they know lawmakers in Congress will never pass it. So it's just a facade. They want to act like they care about climate change when they really don't.
And some of these admissions, this was like a mock job interview, right? Or something like that. Didn't the guy
I think they thought they potentially for a job interview, right? So people are like, oh, maybe they embellished, but this tracks with other things that have happened that we can now connect the dots, right? So, Manny, if you want to play this one, so this first video has to do with the so-called carbon tax, and this is the lobbyist named Keith McCoy for Exxon Mobile.
You know, nobody is going to propose a tax on all Americans. And the cynical side of me says, yeah, we kind of know that. But it gives us a talking point that we can say, well, what is Exxon Mobile for? Well, we're for a carbon tax.
What you said was just really interesting. So it's basically never going to happen, right? Is the calculation?
Yeah. No, it's not. It's not going to. Carbon tax isn't going to happen.
So this helps me understand a little bit why suddenly a lot of US oil majors are talking about a carbon tax, because it sounds pretty.
Well, the cynical side of me, they've got nothing else. Yeah. So it's an easy talking point to say, look, I'm for a carbon tax. So that's the talking point. Yeah. That is in my mind, an effective advocacy tool.
Wow.
Unbelievable. So it's a 10-minute investigative video. I hope everybody watches the whole thing, because it's crucial to understanding how the influential people in America drive our policies. So he's talking about the carbon tax in this segment, right? I think I have a link from CNBC, so you can see in March, I think it was March of this year, the American Petroleum Institute, which is one of these so-called like shadow groups that is mentioned in this report, they come out and the media does this lavish sort of praise about them for here's the headline: American Petroleum Institute endorses carbon pricing as oil and gas industry faces pressure on emissions. It's incredible because they don't actually really believe it. And in this article, it shows how Exxon Mobile and a bunch of other fossil fuel companies met with the Biden administration to tell them how they are for a carbon tax, when they're straight up lying to them. Now we know they're lying to the Biden administration about them supporting a carbon tax, which is incredible. So what does this all have to do with the infrastructure plan? There's another part of this video, if you want to go back to the Unearthed investigation, where McCoy talks about influencing United States senators, and he names names, which is incredible. He names a bunch of people who were part of these so-called bipartisan negotiations for the new infrastructure bill, and basically how they essentially own them. So we're talking about Joe Manchin, we're talking about Kristen Sinema. So play that.
We're playing defense because President Biden's talking about this big infrastructure package, and he's going to pay for it by increasing corporate taxes. You stick to highways and bridges, then a lot of the negative stuff starts to come out because
For you guys.
because there's a germaneness, right? That doesn't make any sense for a highway bill. Why would you put in a something on emissions reductions on climate change to oil refineries in a highway bill?
Who's the crucial guys for you?
Well, Senator Capito, who is who chairs the Senate, who's the ranking member on Environment and Public Works. Joe Manchin, I talk to his office every week. He is the kingmaker on this because he's a Democrat from West Virginia, which is a very conservative state. So he is, and he's not shy about sort of staking his claim early and completely changing the debate. So on the Democrat side, we look for the moderates on these issues. So it's the Manchins, it's the Cinemas, it's the Testers. Other ones that aren't talked about is Senator Coons, who's from Delaware, who has a very close relationship with Senator Biden. So we've been working with his office. Matter of fact, our CEO is talking to him next Tuesday.
It's amazing what they're saying. They got them to say in this.
He says it with a this is that smirk, that grin on his face, and just so matter of factly, like.
Yeah, there's another. We won't go into it, running out of time. But there's another person, lobbyist, they interview. When they ask about what they got out of the Trump administration, the guy literally just starts laughing because they got everything they wanted from the Trump administration. I wanted to show everybody this video if you haven't seen it already, just as an example of how America works for corporate interests and these high-powered companies. They are not working for the American people. The bipartisan, so-called bipartisan infrastructure plan, if you read a story or if you listen to a story about it and this isn't mentioned, then the media is not doing its due diligence in reporting the story, because it wasn't just these people sitting in a room came up with this. It's people like Exxon, and I'm sure there was other fossil fuel firms that were involved in this. And it's just part of this larger deception. One last thing I will say is that the fossil fuel industry is not stupid. They've been doing this for decades. They're the ones that came up with this idea of your personal carbon footprint, this marketing plan that actually won advertising awards to show that that climate change is up to you to fix, not us.
You can prevent forest fires and carbon.
Right. So, yeah. So I just want to lay this all out to show how this plan came to be, the fossil fuel industry's involvement, and just to be skeptical whenever you're reading stories about so-called bipartisan bills from Washington.
Fantastic segment, Rashad.
Wow, thank you.
Fantastic.
Well, it's much needed. It's much needed, especially during a time where that we see places heating up like never before.
As we've covered many times, and who gets, the short end of that stick all the time, the already disadvantaged.
So our guest is here. I just want to quickly just mention the next segment here that we did, which is just real briefly. Just the New York Times had a piece out today called "The Real Toll from Prison COVID Cases May Be Higher Than Reported," and they did a probe, and surprise, surprise, they found non-transparency. Manny, like you said at the top of the hour here, and tragically, they're reporting over 2,700 people who've died due to COVID in connection with U.S. prisons. And this is obviously a subject that we've covered several times. And we actually, on one of our episodes, had, I believe it was Sharon Dolovich from UCLA School of Law, who told us, quote, there are 3,200 county jails, and the vast majority of them are reporting no information. One of the things that I have been extremely troubled by since this pandemic started is the lack of transparency. And she called it a culture of secrecy. So the numbers are likely much, much higher.
Well, we talked about it earlier, and I think that's one of the major problems. We've talked about this a million times. We'll probably talk about it again. But you can't improve. Forget to solve the problems. You can't improve a situation, any situation in your job. My wife works in a corporate setting, and they have KPIs, right? You have KPIs because you want to track performance issues, find problems, find ways to solve them, look for the log jams, all the things. You need the data. And just another example of the law enforcement or powers that be refusing to let themselves be policed by making it difficult to find out exactly what's going on. So we have covered it before. You will look on usnewsbeat.com or in our podcast feed. Again, we are doing this live stream this week in social justice every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern on the social platforms that you see, but we are also throwing these audio feeds onto our podcast feed, and we have done many episodes that are not just us sitting around bringing you all this information, but also deep dive investigative journalism that goes deep into these issues. We've touched upon the COVID-19 in jails and prisons. We had a Dr. Homer Venters who came on in March of 2020 warning people that the death toll in jails and prisons was going to be an astronomically difficult problem to deal with. And then it happened. We were way ahead of this game. Our people know the issues, and we know how to bring them to you. So you can go back and get a broader perspective as to how it's all played out. And we will continue to follow and bring these stories to light. Thank you, Chris, for bringing that to our attention. And following up, we follow up on these things. Hey, I'm too big. I don't want to be that big. Okay, I'm there. All right. So now that I've plugged the podcast again, reminded people who are watching the video that we're also a podcast. We're primarily a podcast, but we're doing this because we can't sit around and wait in between episodes to tell you all of the things that are happening that affect us in a social justice through a social justice lens that includes very large and earth-shattering in some ways news and events that happen not only on our shores, but because we're America, we're usually connected to a lot of things that happen outside of our shores. And to talk about that today, we have a guest. Gentlemen, who are we speaking to, and why is it so important that we do so tonight?
Yeah, so we're very happy to welcome Dr. Louis Herns Marcelin. He's a professor of anthropology and director of global health studies at the University of Miami. He also runs a group down in Haiti. He's the executive committee chair and chancellor of the Inter-University Institute for Research and Development. And we're so pleased to have him. And one of the reasons, as Manny, you mentioned, we cover human rights, civil rights, human rights internationally. Martin Luther King said that, an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And we pride ourselves on shining a light on issues and topics you're just not going to hear in mainstream media, and Haiti is one of them. The United States has a long and complex history with Haiti, and you're just not going to see that or read about that in these news reports. So, Professor, thank you for joining us tonight. I think he might be muted.
Professor Marcelin, are you there? Can you hear us?
Well, hopefully you can figure out some of these bugs. This stuff is never simple. Signing on to these things.
All right, Professor, we cannot see or hear you. If you want to, maybe if you can hear us, sign out, sign back in, perhaps. Jump out, jump back in. Your camera is off and your audio is off. And then maybe if that's still a problem, Rashad, you contacted via email? You guys want to touch via email?
Yeah, Chris did. I guess, Chris, if you want to hit him on email, we could move on to, I think, some of the other segments that we have while we wait for the professor to.
Let's do that. Sometimes technical difficulties make you please stand by. We will circle back. The intro Chris gave broke it down perfectly while we need to be speaking to Dr. Marcelin. So let's keep it going. What do you got for us, Rashad, if you want to hold us down in the meantime?
So this is a segment that I scrapped for time's sake, and I don't think you have any links, but I could talk about it for a little while if you want. It's something that we wanted to discuss last week, and it's basically about the idea of early releases and how people always have this idea that when people are in prison, dependent, regardless of their sentence, how long they're there, or even regardless of what they were in prison for, how they were. There's this idea that we need to just keep them locked up because once you release them, they're a danger to humanity. And as I say that, I think we got news that the doctor has returned. If I'm right, let me know.
I believe you are. Let's see
perfect.
if we can get him in here. There we go. Now
There we are.
Professor, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. That's a great pleasure to be able to participate in your podcast.
And so we like to shine a light on issues that the general population in the United States just don't get from mainstream media. And so I was wondering if you could just break down a little bit of the U.S. History with Haiti, and if you could put this assassination into some context for listeners and viewers.
Thank you very much again for giving me this opportunity. And I think that the American viewers deserve to have an in-depth understanding as to what is happening, because in the mainstream media, the way they treat this, they treat it as an event on its own, as if there is no history, there is no process, and Haiti is a troubled country. Each time that you hear about Haiti, it's about misery, poverty, and violence. So this is what you see. But behind what you see, you have much more than that is going on. We will remember that Haiti was controlled by the United Nations for more than 15 years after the coup d'etat against Aristide. So from 2015 until 2019, MINUSTA was the sole power that, which mission was to help Haiti organize its institutions, organize its security institutions, its rule of law institutions in a way so that democracy and democratic politics can be possible, and also in a way so that the human life can be protected, and a market can be created, and prosperity can be advanced, and human development can be possible. MINUSPA spent 15 years in Haiti. When they left Haiti without any of these institutions they were supposed to help us build. And then what they left us with MINUJUST, which is a new version of United Nations MINUSTA. That new version, the objective of that new version and the mandate of this new version was to help Haiti strengthen his rule of law apparatus. That means its justice system, its prison system, and all the judiciary processes, so that rule of law can exist and Haitians can have access to justice. Again, until today, MINUJUST is in Haiti, and you can see a series of events that have been happening without any serious interventions or commentary from the international community on the state of the situation in Haiti. So what you have here, you have under the eyes of all the Western powers, including the United States, during the latter 2 to 3 years, we have a government that has been governing by decree, that have been destabilizing most of the key institutions that will serve as balance of power within the country. For example, we no longer have a parliament. Nobody said anything. We no longer have a judiciary. No longer said anything. The president of the Supreme Court in Haiti, died about 2 or 3 weeks ago of COVID. It was not replaced, and there is no process for that. And the prime minister that we have, in fact, we don't have just one prime minister. You may hear that we are having competing prime ministers because they have named another acting prime minister, 2 days or 3 days ago, and now the president is dead, assassinated, and you have an acting prime minister that is not an acting prime minister, and one that has been promised to be prime minister, nominated, but hasn't been sworn in. So the situation we are in is a situation in which that rule of law has been destabilized and corruption has been destabilized. And all of this under the noise of a international community, United Nations, the United States, Canada. So what happens with the death of the president, it may be shocking, but it's not a surprise, because we already knew during the last 2 years, and particularly during the last 3 months, there was a buildup of gangs, a fragmentation of society, constant use of gang in politics to attack enemies. And when I say that, I'm not talking just about, the criminal gangs that are acting out just because they are acting out. I'm talking about politicians, including those who are in government and outside of government, using gangs as political arguments, as political tools in order for them to achieve their objective. So what I'm saying here is something systemic that has gangrene Haiti, the Haitian society. And beside that, you have also in the market sector, in the private sector, each of the big families in Haiti, they have a gang. They have a gang. When there is a competition, they send the gang after you. Wow. When they want to attack somebody who wants to bring a new idea, they send somebody to kill you. So Haiti has been like that. Why? Because we have been taken in charge by the international community, and as if you were taking in charge a baby, and what they left after they stayed in the country for all these years is just that empty promises with institutions that are incapable of fulfilling its prophecy, what they were supposed to do. So the problem that we have with the killing of the president is not just an accidental killing. It's not just because Haiti is violent. Haiti doesn't know how to govern itself. Is that there is a culture, there is an infrastructure that maintains that violence in Haiti. And it is supported by the international community. If it is not supported actively, it is supported by their silences, because all these things were happening, and they keep saying, you have to respect the legitimacy of the government, you have to have new elections, yet, the situation of gang violence may put people in a position in which everybody is sheltered at home.
Professor, we always try to do, especially with, sort of international stories, is to try to get an idea of why America and why Americans need to, think about what's happening in Haiti and the importance of that. So can you just talk about that? And maybe briefly, if you could just talk about the history, where obviously you had the Haitian Revolution, and there at the same time you had potential slave results happening in the United States, but there was efforts to suppress that the Haitian news. So, people so the slaves in this country wouldn't exercise their powers and revolt. Can you just talk about some of that?
Yes. And then, so all of these have their roots very deep in history. And as you know, Haiti is a product of, the colonial history and slavery, plantation society with an extraordinary hell context for Haitians, for the slaves. When Haiti became independent, when Haiti organized the revolution, it wasn't a revolt, it was a revolution. And they organized the revolutions in order to not just proclaim that Haiti was independent, from bondage and slavery, but humankind, wherever you are, wherever you live, you should be free. You should be able to imagine the future, think about your daily life, provide for who depends on you, and then think about the future in a way that you can, leave your positive mark on earth. When Haiti took his freedom, we had the revolution. It was a huge challenge for the United States and all the Western powers. But let's face it, a revolution has happened. Nobody, no power from outside has, remote control access over what was going on in the revolution. A population that has been kept under bondage now is creating the path for liberation for its own people, for its own, to take itself in charge and to think about the possibility of having a sovereign nation, a sovereign society. This has scared the hell out of all the power in the world. Great Britain which was, a global empire, The United States was a slave empire. Well, it wasn't an empire yet, but it was emerging, as a new slave, esclavagist country. And Europe, all those countries, including Latin American countries, saw in the revolution a challenge. So what was happening since the revolution in 1804 was that all the international politics have been to contain Haiti first. That means that to prevent a spillover of the revolution from Haiti to Latin America, from Haiti to the Caribbean, from Haiti to the United States. That's the first thing. Because here too, we were having enslaved individuals, enslaved people, and the plantation, narrative and plantation structure was what maintained, the whole foundations of American society. So they have to prevent that. Second, they had to show that Haiti's governance will never be something that will be fulfilled. Why? Because if Haiti can govern itself, that would mean that Black Americans also can take their own freedom and they can, call for self-governance. Countries in Africa can also claim for self-governance, can talk about sovereignty. Other countries under subjugations can do that. So the Western powers, it's not just a United States issue. The Western powers, they organize a systematic and a kind of concerted effort to knock out all positive effort of governance that would come out of Haiti, because it will be a bad example. And then they have to show the world that these niggers, between quote, do not know how to govern, and therefore they are not deemed to civilization, and they cannot claim the same right as a white person, a European person can claim, and then they are the one to rule us, not us to rule ourselves. So now this would be a simple story if it was just the foreigners preventing Haiti from building a society. Unfortunately, the way domination works is that it triggered down through a series, layers of people who have benefited from the system, including Blacks themselves who became free, including people who became the people who invested in the state, who control the state. So what Haiti has done, those who have been able to control the state claim that they are the people who carry the legacies of civilization, the legacies of Western Europe, the legacies, of the colonizer. So they become colonizers of their own people. So Haitian's governance, since the beginning, Haitian governance that was codified through the state was a governance that was against the nation. You have the nation in one way, you have the state in one way. And the state's challenge in Haiti has always been to find ways to continue to maintain the subjugation of those who were former slaves. And as a result, what will happen? We will develop a political system that is unstable because we fought for freedom, but we never achieved equality. So some people translate freedom in terms of the right to govern. So you have a class, a dominant class in Haiti that is composed of both mulattoes, and it's important that I insist in the color tone, and the Blacks. So the Blacks and mulattoes privilege, they fight among themselves to know who has the right to rule the rest. That's the first thing. Second, they fight among themselves to know who will the Westerners use as the conduit of Western power. So they'll become the representation of the master in the country. So throughout Haiti's history, until we came to recently to all the movement that happens until we have U.S. occupation, Haiti was a kind of, Haiti has developed an internal colonization using the same resources of the of the people and the same resources that people put available for everybody, and then resource them for a little go. And around that, you have the Western powers that reinforce these people, particularly when we come to the 20th century with the United States. We have the United States invasion at the beginning of the 20th century. And what they have done, they have reorganized the country. They have reshaped the country, wired the country in a way that we remain totally dependent. So a political class in Haiti will take a political decision only if Washington tells them to take that decision. Okay? And this irrespective of who you are talking to, whether it's Black or it is white, whether it's in the left, some of the left, not everybody, but whether it is in the right, certainly in the right. So in Haiti, every single people fighting for power has a white Westerner behind him or behind her to defend, to intervene whenever they lose power. In the name of human rights, they will intervene to restore exactly the very same people that have been committing the problems. So recently what had happened, since the Duvalier regime fell, you had a succession of governments that happened, that emerged in Haiti. And all these successions of government, until we came to Aristide, have been successions of government that was supported by the United States. And when the United States doesn't support you, like it was in the case of Aristide, what they do, they destabilize you and they destroy you. And after Aristide, they organize themselves in order to have United Nations, taking the role of the occupier for reconstruction. Reconstruction was never done. And what the United Nations has done instead through MINUSTAH was to create puppet governments from Martelly's, the former president before, the one who was killed, and who gave us this one. And all of this with the consent of Washington. All of this with the consent of the United States. So that's the situation we are in.
Now, Professor, you just outlined a whole universe of obstacles in the Haitian people's way, from the assassination of the president, right? You had the dissolution of the legislature. I think you said the Supreme Court justice, he died of COVID recently. You have the global community sort of just continuing to step on Haiti's throat, if you will, keep them suppressed. And then you have the internal fighting among the different classes. So let me ask you, in your opinion, and after this question, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your group, because you are on the ground in Haiti, your group. What needs to happen in Haiti?
What needs to happen in Haiti is a very important question that calls for a realistic approach here, because we have to know who are the players at play. First, the international community is a huge player in this game, because we know as a neo-colonized country and a politics within the nation states, does not happen just because of the wants of those who are in that nation states. So we have to count on international community. What do I mean? I talked about first the United States, because that's the global power, and that's the power that has the capillary power to reach whoever the US wants to reach. And the US, again, because the US, in one way or another, has leverage in relation, as leverage in the game, in the sense that all groups or parties or institutions in Haiti, in one way or another, they receive their money, their visa, their children go to school in the United States. The United States is the lifeline. So there is no choice on that one. And beside, we have a huge Haitian diaspora, which I will talk about that later. Second, you have also a United Nations. Although United Nations, didn't do what they came to do in Haiti, we have no choice. United Nations is the global institution, that has the legal framework of which Haiti is a member of. Haiti participated in the construction of this legal framework. So Haiti has the responsibility to guarantee the rights of its citizens, to guarantee the lives of his citizens, and to create space so then his citizens can blossom. So United Nations has coercive power against Haiti, not because of the fact that we are calling for United Nations to tell Haiti what to do, but we are calling on United Nations to help Haiti reinforce the institution for which Haiti signed off for. So United Nations can do things, particularly because they are also on the ground with MINUSTAH. You also have, of course, fundamentally, the main actors here are the Haitians themselves. The first, we have those remnants of the government. There is no choice. We have to address the situation immediately. So those who are in power now, regardless if they are illegitimate or not, regardless our political position in relation to them, they are the one controlling the police. They are the one controlling the public administration, and so forth and so on. So they are an actor. Second, you have different sectors in the private sectors, including those big, networks of families that are responsible for where the country is at the first place. We have no choice. We have to dialogue with them. Okay. And third, the political parties. The political parties are fragmented in Haiti. you have as many political parties as you have people aspiring for being president. But be that it may, that the reality that we have to learn to sit down with those actors. And third, we have the community-based organizations. Most of the things that have been done in Haiti have always been done without Haitians themselves, without community-based organizations, human rights organization, peasants organization, students organization, churches, all those institutions that are vital for the country. Okay, so what I think can happen is for the United Nations to create a conduit. I'm not saying for United Nations to go back to Haiti, because I just told you exactly what happened. If we are expecting United Nations to save Haiti, so Haiti is already dead.
Right.
So we are saying that for the United Nations to use its authority to create the conduit, and the United States to use its power, at least for one time, for good in relation to Haiti, to engage Haiti in a different base, not to impose Haiti what he has to do, but to lead Haiti to sit together. We need that. And third, we need those forces also, and those forces that are the forces that we call the Western forces that are friends of Haiti, to be able to provide the support for the Haitian National Police, because we are dealing in Haiti with more than 165 gangs, criminal gangs and political gangs, and all of them are armed. And the police in Haiti is so corrupt and so weak. Those good guys who are in the police, they are not enough. So they need some support, policial support, in order for them to do their work to reinforce the institutions. So those steps are not difficult, but I doubt that they will happen. Why? Because the United States are going to have election in 2 years, in less than 2 years. The Democrats, are very fragile. The position of the Democrats of Biden's in power is very fragile. And Haiti is a hot potato. They don't want to give the Republican ammunition. So then, Haiti can become a problem for them. So up to now, the United States has no strategy in relation to Haiti. Out to the moment I'm talking to you, they have no strategy what to do. But the political courage for the Biden administration to take a stand and then to engage Haiti on a different basis, not sending soldiers in Haiti. We don't want their soldiers. It's not the point here. But we want police. We want to train police. We want to have forces to back up our police officers so then they can dismantle the gangs. But this decision, will it be done? I'm not sure. United Nations also, I don't either. I don't think that will take the decision. And you know why? Because the legacy United Nations left to Haiti is a legacy of cholera, with more than 1 million people affected. They have promised that they were going to, give some financial support to the people who were affected. And that was never done, except for little small project that they have put forward. The United Nations didn't take its responsibility. The other problem that the United Nations left us is a bunch of soldiers that let a bunch of pregnant girls, sexual violence and all of these things. But still, again, we have to work with what we have. United Nations has the obligation to force Haiti to reinforce its institutions by using the mini-jus mechanism it has in Haiti, reinforce its objective, reinforce its mandate, so that it can accompany the country, for good. And what are the forces that we have? We have the Haitian diaspora, which is extremely fragmented, but still, Haitian diaspora exists in the United States, in Canada, in Europe, particularly in France. There are a lot of organizations of Haitian diaspora. In this dialogue, we need to engage all those actors in order for Haiti to at least stabilize the situation. And then we can breathe to see how we are going to reimagine the future of the country.
Well, Professor, we can't thank you enough for such critical insights and just, helping educate and teach all the listeners and viewers that we have here. Again, hey, you just don't get that depth hearing a 30-second news bit on mainstream media about Haiti. So we're on time here now. We're up on the hour. So I just want to thank you again from the whole Newsbeat crew, and we're sharing links to your group with viewers. Once again, Dr. Louis Herns Marcelin is a professor of anthropology and director of global health studies at the University of Miami. And he's also executive committee chair and chancellor of the Inter-University Institute for Research and Development. And we're sharing those links. Professor, thank you again.
And thank you for this opportunity. Good work.
All right.
Wow.
Well,
Wow.
FC, you're Manny, you're muted. There we
I
go.
was just saying that I learned a lot, and I appreciate the time and depth because, as you said, Chris, you don't get that on your 30-second news bites, and I suspect you won't get it on your Sunday morning shows on cable, even though by Sunday it'll probably be forgotten about. So we do it here this week in social justice. Thank you to the professor, and thank you to you gentlemen for rocking for us. Amazing interview.
I mean, there's just so much there. I mean,
Yeah, the one thing to just leave it with is that these major political events obviously don't happen in a vacuum. And he was able to connect basically colonial legacy to this point in time, which is remarkable to me.
and again, the U.S. I mean, we have been so involved in Haiti. There's billions of humanitarian aid that we've sent. We occupied Haiti. And so the things that are happening now in Haiti are a result of some of our involvement, and people need to know that.
Indeed.
Like he said, the whole global community is stepping on their throat, trying to, suppress them. No change is ever going to happen unless the full story is told.
Well, that is right. And that's what we try to do. So thank you, gentlemen, for that astounding interview. Thank you to the professor, Dr. Marcelin, for joining us. And again, to anyone listening, more information can be found at the organization. It's the Inter-University Institute for Research and Development at inured.org. inured.org, like injured without the J.org. So there's that. Okay. Inured. I'm inured with you. No, that's not. You inure me. No, I don't know. No, I can't find a word that works. In the meantime, in between time, just to remind folks who are listening on the podcast feed, we are doing this live video stream with the guests that you hear Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on our social media channels. You can go to usnewsbeat.com/twizzage. TWISJ, this week in social justice, or usnewsbeat.com/watch. I think it'll take you to the same place to get the links to our previous shows. It's on YouTube, it's on Facebook, and it's on Twitch, but all of those things are there. usnewsbeat.com/twizzage this week in social justice. And if you're watching, please do subscribe to Newsbeat on your podcast or streaming app. We are, of course, on Apple Podcasts, Google, Stitcher, Spotify, of course, Joe's podcast app. There's a guy named Joe, and he just has a podcast app, and there's only one podcast on there. It's ours. So you can go there as well. Shouts again to the band called Fuse. I am hiding out in the Honeycomb Hideout for the band called Fuse in an undisclosed location, and I'm broadcasting from there. You guys are still where you normally were. Shouts to the lavender in your background, Rashad. It's
God, because it looked like I had Groot growing out of my head.
You are Groot. So let's lastly close this out with our super cool segments. We're gonna look at the past and then look at the future. So let's go News Beat the Past.
Yeah, so I'll take the past. Just so keeping in line with what we had just said, of shining a light on injustices that many may not know about. July 11th is the anniversary of the Srebrenica genocide, and for people who don't know what that is, back in 1995, during the Bosnian War, there was thousands upon thousands in this particular episode of that conflict. I think it's estimated to be about 10,000 men and boys who were put to death during this, and every couple years they discover and they identify more victims. And I saw a news cast that just came across today about 19 more victims that were identified. So I thought it was worth mentioning here.
Absolutely. Again, some things we don't necessarily get enough information about.
Yeah. And just a second part of that was that in July of 1967 was the convening of the Kerner Commission here in the United States to investigate the reasons for the mass rebellions across the country at the time. And that is a topic that we've covered in several episodes. Manny, you mentioned one at the top of the hour that featured the band called Fused, and the conclusion of that report was that it was systemic racism and oppression, and if it was not addressed, there would be a creation of two different Americas. Now, we did a follow-up on the 50th anniversary of that in 2018, and it basically said nothing's changed. So
I think it even said things that got worse, right?
things that got worse.
Was that? Yes, shout out to Silent Night, who eliminated. He's in
That
the
was
back.
me. That was me.
I was on that episode, right? Yeah, absolutely. Because we mix our highfalutin, high energy, high level journalism with music and original lyrical contributions by incredible independent hip hop artists to punctuate and exclamation points on these issues. This was a crazy episode. I do encourage people to look back through our archives. If you haven't seen it, you can go to usnewsbeat.com, go to episodes, you can scroll through, or you can look on our podcast feed, go back. It's called America, Even More, quote, Separate and Unequal. And, there's a lot of people who will argue for, there's people who argue for a post-racial America, which is nonsense. But there are people who argue, say, look, things still have a long way to go, but we're so much better off than we were back during the civil rights and da-da-da. And maybe at the surface, maybe what you see on TV every night, maybe what you see, enough people being able to make it despite circumstances. Some of that surface level stuff can fool you, confuse you, bamboozle you. But if you look at the data, as we talked about, if you look at some of the real ingrained systems in place, and the results of those systems, you will see, as we evidenced in the Kerner report 50 years later, that things are not really better than they were, even though supposedly all this progress has been made. Ironically, you can't teach any of this in the schools because critical race theory, but whatever. We'll come back to that some other time. But the fact is the fact. And if you can't learn it in the school, you can learn it on Newsbeat. Go check it out. It's on the screen. Kerner report 50 years later. America is even more separate and unequal. I had to plug our own coverage of this topic. So thank you, Chris, for reminding us that it exists and that it is out there to inform, educate, and entertain in some way, which is weird to think that the news can entertain you, but we make the news sound really freaking good. So, Newsbeat. Yeah. Hip, hip, hooray. Great. Are we at the future now? I was cheerleading for us. I'm sorry. I get,
We're going to the future.
Future.
All right. Really quick. This caught my eye. I think yesterday, Representative Katie Porter had this op-ed in the New York Times called "A Mental Health Crisis is Not a Crime." So this is an issue we covered extensively on Newsbeat. I think it was called "Mentally Ill and Incarcerated," and it just showed how mental illness fuels the prison population. It's incredible when you look at some of the numbers of the people who are in prison and suffering from mental health. At the time, what we reported was there are 10 times more people with a serious mental illness currently incarcerated than in state hospitals. So the reason we bring that back, I bring that up, not to just to mention our episode, but is to note that Katie Porter is also the sponsor of I would say a hugely important bill in Congress called the Mental Health Justice Act of 2021. And what it would basically do is it would provide federal funding, grant funding to states and local communities to help them hire, train, and send out mental health professionals to respond to in lieu of law enforcement to emergency situations. So this is obviously huge because there's so much contact of people suffering from mental illnesses with police. We hear all the time a family member calling the cops, and they somehow then die or wounded tragically from their interaction with the police. This instead would send mental health professionals there using federal funding. It seems like a no-brainer. It'll probably won't pass because Congress is spineless, but I hope it does. So definitely keep an eye out on this bill. And if you do work in some fields where you can advocate for this, definitely do, because this is hugely important when you talk about criminal justice reform.
Yeah, and can I tell you, we have the link. I think we shared it to the bill.
Yes,
to the actual bill. I'm going to challenge our listeners. I would love for you to read a bill. Maybe you do. Maybe you read bills. I don't know. I don't read bills very often. I find that the synopsis does just fine for me personally. But we're linking to the bill. And I think it's important that some of us take a little more time to look at what's in these bills and learn the vernacular of lawmaking. I don't know. Maybe I'm going to read this bill and come back next week and report to you what I thought. Because we talk about it, we mention it, we say it's not going to pass, and I want to know what's in it. I want to know what we could have had, what we should have, what's being thrown into. We hear about all this stuff being thrown into all these bills. So I challenge people to spend a little more time actually reading the bills that are being voted on by the people that we supposedly vote into office. We vote them into office. I don't mean to say supposedly, and then you tell me, oh, maybe we didn't vote them. Maybe the election was rigged.
Well, there's Exxon. Who knows?
Right, exactly. So I'm just saying, just a little, Manny thing is I'm going to read this damn bill because I'd like to know what's in the bill, and we give you the link to the bill so we make it easier. There's actually bills. Like when we say there's actually, you can actually read the bill. Anyway, thank you for that. Katie Porter is a beast.
Katie Porter is awesome.
Oh,
I mean,
boy.
the way she holds corporate executives' feet to the fire.
All right,
incredible.
that is the past and the present, or the future.
Future.
I guess the
present and the present. Present, future.
I guess the present is us now, and that's it. This is This Week in Social Justice. I think we're done. What an amazing, comprehensive look at the issues affecting us in Haiti, how we've been intertwined with that country's history for a long time, how it will not stop. As the great Mr. Sean Puff Daddy Combs once said, can't stop, won't stop, which seems to be, look, I'm doing an Ari Melber. Yeah. I'm doing it right.
Come on, man.
I was doing this 10 years before Ari Melber.
I love how SK is like your late night show sidekick.
Yes, yeah. He's like,
we need this more often. I mean, it's amazing.
I was doing Ari Melber when Ari Melber was still in J school, bruh. So take that, Ari Melber, with your rap euphemisms intertwined in your whatever. Ari Melber's fine with me. I don't care. Yeah, it's fine. Whatever. But the fact remains that we are your hip hop infused source for social justice journalism mixed with music. Check out our podcast feed, Newsbeat, to find out why we were the 2018 Journalism Podcast of the Year, New York Press Club, 2019, 2020, and probably 2021, 22, 2023 Journalism Podcast of the Year, PCLI, Society of Professional Journalists. That's right. A podcast about social justice with a bunch of rapping ass rappers in it. Journalism Podcast of the Year. There are some other outlets you might have heard of on that list, including the New York Times, the New York Times. Yeah, the New York Times, and the Walk Street Journal. Yeah, the Walk Street Journal. I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe some other state, but those places lost because we're better. Anyway, I'm just bragging about us. I like cheerleading. That's it, guys. I think we're done. Am I missing anything? Any last words? Anyone have anything to say?
No, I think we covered a lot of bases. I'm sort of exhausted, I think.
Man, listen, long show. If you're tuning in at the end, go to usnewsbeat.com, subscribe to the podcast. You'll get the podcast feed as well as our full in-depth award-winning episodes. And you can check us out on various places online. US Newsbeat, wherever you type the things. My name is Manny Faces. I'm the, doesn't matter. I run shit around here. It's my man, Chris, my man, Rashad, also run things. We make all this happen. We'll be here next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern. I will have a very, very minimalistic background because I'm packing and moving, and I will have no fun stuff in the background. Tonight, I was at the Fuse Banco Fuse headquarters, deep in the bowels of New Jersey. Thank you. Thank you to them for hosting me and letting me rock with y'all tonight. Thank you, Chris and Rashed, for your work. And I will see y'all tomorrow night in New York, Reigning City.
Oh, snap.
Yeah. Peace and love to everyone checking us out. We'll be here next Wednesday, God willing. Do check out all our stuff. We love you. Thank you for listening. Peace and love. We're out.